Thanks for hopping on this conversation with me. First, I would actually like to start by you introducing yourself and giving us a little bit of context on your story and how you got into marketing and advertising.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Joel. My name is Obînna Onungwa. Everyone calls me Obi for short. CEO and founder of Powered by Q, a strategic brand marketing agency. Started out of New York about 10 years ago. And began like most folks, really looking for a side hustle at the time. Had a mobile application that I was working on and looking to get funding for, and really needed, some side income. Had a client ask to get a website done. I think I might have charged him like $500 or $600, whatever he was able to pay. And then I figured it out, right? And so through that initial project, right, I started collaborating with graphic designers and copywriters and photographers and videographers and web designers and web developers. And just like that, I fell into this world of media.
I was speaking with Abasade earlier, and he was asking me a little bit about my journey. And I actually told him that there are two people who actually, when I came back from Switzerland after working in a startup there, moved back to the US, there are two people who actually inspired me a bit to start my business. And you're one of them.
Wow.
And you didn't just inspire me, actually, I basically took your entire business model.
Yeah, listen.
Like you essentially showed me exactly how to, whether you meant to or not, right? But you showed me exactly how to start a business, how to run an agency, how to think through strategy.
Wow.
And I don't know if you remember that time period at all.
Vaguely, roughly. I mean, you and I worked on a project basis, Joel, on many occasions, right? And I just remember just thinking, man, this is a really, really sharp dude. And again, for me, it was never really a place of like competition. I've always kind of seen the space as collaborative. And no, I mean, listen, imitation is the highest form of flattery. So to that point, I'm really inspired by what you're doing, honestly. And to see it kind of come full circle in this way is amazing. I'm inspired by mobile media. Love the work that you guys are putting out. High attention to detail. And you bring a lot of personality to it, man.
Nice. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
And because you're someone who's been in the advertising space essentially before it became super hyped up on social media. Now everyone and their grandparents wants to run ads. And you've also had a business for a very long time. I believe you might have even either interned or worked at Goldman Sachs for a while, and you transitioned from sales to advertising. When you look back at the last, let's say, 10, 15 years of your life,
Yep.
let's say, think about that college student who literally just got out of college.
Yep.
Do you feel like you are extremely happy with how your journey has played out so far? Is there anything that you would change?
Yeah, I think there's always some things that you would change, right? But I think in hindsight, the greatest blessing to ever happen to me was to fall into sales, right? Good friend of mine's, funny enough, senior year of high school, invited me to an open meeting. And at this open meeting, we got a presentation to join Amway. Mm-hmm. And Amway, as you know, is a direct sales, multi-level marketing company. And looking back on that experience, that was sales 101, right? We were brought into the fundamentals of selling. And as I bridge that experience to sort of what we're doing today, even with all the technology that's coming to market, conversations around AI, nothing beats being able to connect with a person one-to-one. Mm-hmm. Identify a problem, put together a solution, and articulate that solution in a clear and compelling way, mm-hmm. right? So hands down, from Amway onward, I found myself working mostly in sales functions. You mentioned Goldman Sachs. Interned at Goldman Sachs many moons ago on their sales and trading division. And even then, again, the goal was the same, right? Just selling at a higher level, right? I mean, how do you take those skills and apply them to some of the most lucrative markets in the world? But no, learned quickly that finance wasn't really my thing, and ended up kind of pivoting out of finance
How did you learn that finance wasn't your thing?
Well, I think in hindsight, the culture didn't really jive with me. I think investment banking is a very specific subculture. I don't think there's really a middle ground, right? You either love it, right, and you kind of view this as your, as your ticket, right, or you're absolutely exhausted by it, right? So I think it didn't take me long to figure out that this is probably not the right environment. But I love New
What
York City.
specifically about the environment? Was it the environment of long hours? Was it the culture? What specifically about the environment?
Yeah, I think it's the hours. It was the language, right? I mean, finance is a language, right? It's a subculture. I mean, people who work in banking, at least from my limited observation at the time, they're pretty sold out to this stuff. I mean, this is you're always on, and it's really a 7 days a week thing, right? So I would say that in hindsight, it really was entrepreneurial, but without the same perks, if that makes sense, right? I mean, you don't own the bank; you're an employee of Goldman, but you're always on, right? And so my thought process was, hey, if I'm always going to be on, right, I might as well always be on for something that I've got equity or ownership in. So I think the draw of just taking these skills and applying them to a venture of my own was just something that at the time just made a lot of sense to me.
What do you feel like the appeal might be for people who are in finance? Because as an entrepreneur, that's the absolute perfect way to think about it. If I'm always going to be on, I might as well be on for something that I own. But there are people that are drawn to this finance lifestyle,
Yeah.
where they don't necessarily care about the ownership, and they absolutely love always being on. They love the culture. So being someone who was in that culture for a while, what do you think is the appeal for those individuals?
Yeah, so it's a super competitive space. It's for all intents and purposes, it's an elite game. And so again, I think from a networking standpoint, from an access standpoint, there's always going to be folks that are drawn to certain spaces, right? Certainly in our market, right? So again, think finance, think consulting, right? Think tech. In my mind, those are kind of the big three. And in general, right, people kind of take the attitude that, hey, if I can make it here, I can make it anywhere. And as you're alluding to, some people sort of go to stay. They see themselves as kind of career people, and the goal is to sort of, build equity and build position in a career, in an industry. And then others folks see it as a launch pad, right? A place where they can go, get skills, build relationships, right? Accrue some capital of their own, right? And then ultimately deploy that strategically, right? In a venture of their own, right? And so, yeah, I would say that's the draw, right? To people going to these spaces, right? They want to meet like-minded individuals that they can either collab with, right? In a corporate context, or ultimately start a business with.
Okay. And as someone who has worked in both sales and marketing, what's the difference between those two?
Yeah.
We've spoken about this a few times.
Yeah, no, I get that one all the time, right? I think it's interesting, man. If you listen, you go online, you're going to find 50,000 definitions of this, but I like to keep it really, really simple. Marketing to me, right, is ultimately about telling stories to a specific audience who you can solve a problem for, right? And to the extent that you do that well, you're going to gain attention, you're going to gain awareness, and ideally, if you can systematically drive that attention or awareness into a database or a place where you can sort of get in contact with these individuals, then you are generating leads, right? So the ultimate goal of marketing, by my view, right, is to generate a lead, right? And when you break generating a lead down, it's ultimately about building an audience with people who you can solve problems for. Right. Whereas sales, right, to me, is a little more tactical, right? That's it's developing, or really presenting rather, right, a solution one-to-one, right, to an individual, right, and ultimately guiding that individual through to making a decision or engaging in a transaction, right, to solve said problem.
In the, let's say, e-commerce space or a lot of these newer online businesses, would you then say that there's no real sales aspect there because you mentioned that a lot of sales is one-to-one.
Yep.
All right. So is it all marketing for the online businesses?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, ecom, I would say is probably more marketing heavy, right, and less sales heavy in that sense, right? In the sense that in the ecom context, really the technology, right, is doing the heavy lifting, right, in terms of guiding the sale, right? So in that context, you're probably thinking about UI, UX, right? You're thinking through, okay, the experience, right, of customers once they land on sort of the purchase page, right? How intuitive is it for them, right, to go ahead and carry out the sale, right? And so in that context, right, you've got the web application, right, ultimately driving the sale, right? But behind that process, right, you're typically putting a lot of thought and energy into your marketing machine, right, to ultimately gain awareness, right, get folks to opt in to your list, and from there guide them into the transaction.
And because you have a an advertising company, a branding company, you work with a lot of founders. Are there specific traits that you've seen in some of the founders that have gone on to be very successful?
Yeah, in general, I think the founders that I find that are the most successful, right, ultimately just have an endurance about them, right? I see entrepreneurship ultimately as an endurance sport. Perseverance prevails, right? Folks who can really just commit to figuring it out, right? Getting up when you get knocked down, and most importantly, right, knowing where to go, right, to get your questions answered, right, to get help, right, to learn, right. Again, going back to our early interactions, one of the things that I admire about you is that you're an amazing student, right. I think you know from the different entrepreneurs that I've seen you work with, you've taken that attitude of, okay, like what can I learn from this individual? Whether it's staffing, right, from one particular individual that comes to mind, right, marketing, sales, right, finance even, right. Who do I have in network? What business owners, what entrepreneurs can I collab with and learn from, right, to shore up my weaknesses, right? So I would say perseverance, hands down, is kind of like the characteristic. And then just humility, right, to just learn from any and everyone, right, that has skill sets that you need.
How does speed play into entrepreneurship for you? Because you said that essentially the best entrepreneurs have this ability to endure. But endurance is almost a long-term game, right?
Yeah.
And I hear a lot of entrepreneurs say that the most important thing about being an entrepreneur is speed, being fast.
Yeah.
So is it possible to constantly be running at 100% pace for a very long time?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's an interesting perspective, right? I see endurance training and speed training as complementary, right? So one of the things that I've gotten into lately has been cycling. And as I get into the sport, I'm learning, right, that there's a time to train for endurance, right? Zone 2, right? Conditioning the heart to be able to sustain an effort for a long period of time. And there's also a time to train for speed, right? Higher exertion, more intense, focused effort, right? Where you're going all out. Now you probably can relate to this, right? Basically no one, right, can go all out all the time, right?
I might disagree with that. But
Meaning that, okay, like, from a physical standpoint, right, there are limits, right, to your ability to max out. I guess in thinking through that analogy in a business context, right, I think, developing the awareness, right, to know sort of when to be in what mode, right, I think is important. And frankly speaking, I think for me, as I'm getting older, right, I'm beginning to think more in terms of sustainability, in terms of how you structure your business, right, in terms of how you build things to last, right. And again, as entrepreneurs, we're ultimately in the business of designing and building business models, right? And so again, there's a model that you can design that's optimized for quick money. That's a hustle, right? And then there's a model that you can design, right, for predictable recurring revenue, right? That's going to be there in perpetuity, right? Which one do you want? Right? I think when you're first starting out, right, you're naturally more attracted, right, to that hustle, right? You've got immediate needs, and so you approach a business from a headspace of immediacy and urgency, right? But then I think you get to a point where you begin to break some things, right? And you slow down to speed up and say, okay, wait a second, okay, what's my ultimate goal here, right? You know, what am I trying to optimize for, right? And I think that's when we begin to think in terms of, okay, listen, I want to create something that's foundationally sound, right? And that's going to be here for me in the long run.
I have to push back and disagree with that, because what I've realized is that within startup culture, a lot of it's all about urgency, it's all about speed. And then once a company reaches, let's say, like the level of Apple, right? They no longer have this startup feeling. They no longer have this startup culture, and now all of their products suck. No one's really excited to purchase an iPhone anymore, and you can see the conversation around Apple right now.
Yeah.
And it's because they've lost this startup spirit, and there is a way to continue to build with urgency whilst building a solid business model.
Sure.
And I actually see it a lot in a founder. It's I think the Asian founder who owns the AI company.
Are you thinking NVIDIA?
Yes, I see it a lot in him.
Jensen.
Yes, his culture is heavy on work, speed, urgency.
Sure.
Having easy access to everyone on his team.
Yep.
But they're an incredibly huge company, but they have a startup
mentality.
Exactly.
Sure. Well, so to that end, I don't think we're fully in disagreement, right? So to your point, there is a relationship with innovation and speed. Now, again, I think with both of those examples, right? I think whether we're looking at an Apple or we're looking at an NVIDIA, I think the way that those organizations balance, right, sustainability and speed, right, is probably different, right, than sort of, I don't know, smaller organizations doing anywhere between $1 million to $5 million a year, right, or even south of that, right. But to the point that I think you're ultimately getting at, right, you want to stay scrappy, right. You don't want to get fat, right. So figuratively speaking, right, and you want to break things, right, and keep a mind for creativity and keep a mind open for possibility. So I don't think that is opposed, right, with sustainability, and I think ultimately you want to find a balance, right, between building a business that has a sound structure, that's built to last, that's built, with the end in mind, right, while also, right, not being overly stiff, if you will, and closed off, right, to innovating and thinking outside the box and trying things and experimenting, and to your point, moving fast. Yeah.
So your agency, you guys are able to create extraordinary brand strategies. Like I've seen a few of the strategies you guys have put together, and I'm always blown out the window by how detailed it is. How you guys think through positioning a brand, an audience, and overall using a proper brand message to reach that audience. So do you guys have on your team a philosophy that you think through when putting together brand strategies?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for that, Joel. But I think fundamentally, the work that we're really looking to focus on and refine these days is we're really looking to build AI-proof brands, if you will, right? And I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek in the sense that there's a lot of mysticism and anxiety around AI these days, what it can do and what the implications are, right, for the future of our industry. But as you alluded to, business ultimately is about people, right? And when we think about strategies, it's ultimately really looking to go deep, right, on the individual that we want to solve a problem for. And ultimately, that's really it, right? Our belief is that human beings are driven by stories, right? And to the extent that we can understand the inner dialogue, right, that's happening, in the minds, in the hearts of our target audience, we can now back into a solution, right, that will appeal, right, to that customer. And so that's really, core to the strategy, right? Who are we looking to serve? What's the inner dialogue, right, that's happening, right, within that individual, right? And how do we craft a narrative? How do we craft a strategy that's ultimately going to resonate with that individual, right? And the key thing is to think in terms of individuals rather than to think in terms of markets, quotation. And I think that's where a lot of folks miss it, right? They attempt to appeal to these large markets, and as a result, not only do they take an overly mechanical approach to their marketing, but it's ultimately very general as well, right? And individuals can see through that, right? As opposed to dialing in, understanding that inner dialogue, appreciating the language, right, that individual speaks, right, and then meeting that individual, right, with an authentic solution, right? So I think that's at the heart of our positioning strategy. And then, as you spoke to, right, your ability to distill that down to a single message, right, is key, right? And so that's the anchor point, and then from there you're able to build out, all the sexy things that people associate with branding, right?
So step one is audience.
Step one is audience, I suppose, but even within that is really step one is individual, right? And appreciating, okay, who is the individual that we want to serve, and then what's the message? What's the inner dialogue that they're wrestling with, right? That makes
So then,
sense.
how do you think through the individual you want to serve for a specific brand?
Yeah.
So let's say you have a new company. How do you think through what that company does and how you connect it to an individual?
So our approach as an agency, typically, folks will reach out, right, with different brand initiatives, brand objectives, and invariably, right, they tend to be torn through they're split between multiple audiences. And so what we'll typically do, right, is, we'll gather some information, right, and get a sense of, okay, well, what are the assumptions, right, that this founder, this owner presently has about their market. And then we'll usually attempt to see, okay, well, have they tested these assumptions in any meaningful way? 99% of the time they haven't, right? And so they typically have some qualitative, hunch, right, that they're building on, right? And so then at that point, right, we'll typically look to reach out to folks like yourself, right, that are masters, right, when it comes to all things Facebook and Instagram advertising. And we can then begin to test our assumptions, right? And at those ads that we're rolling forward, we think of them almost as a scaffolding, if you will, right? We're not going in too deep on the creative, but how can we cost effectively test our assumptions about said market, right? And these days with the internet, right, I mean, you can literally test hundreds of messages, hundreds of creative, and you can numerically and quantitatively land on, okay, is my assumption about this audience responding to this message or this offer accurate? If yes, right, we can begin to sort of build out a more robust or more complete campaign around this audience. And then if not, right, we can confidently discard it and move on, right? And so that at a high level is how we test audience assumptions.
Something that I've wanted to ask you about is I personally feel like you're very much an old school marketer.
Okay.
Right. So when I say that, I mean like David Ogilvy, who's probably the best advertiser of all time, right? Like he's an old school marketer where you think through the audience, you think through the approach first.
Yep.
And there's this new school thought, right, where it's, okay, we're just going to throw all that out the window.
Okay.
And we're just going to put a product out there.
Yep.
Right. So similar to Ben, he actually took this approach, right? Okay. I have a product. Well, I have an idea for a product. I don't even have the product yet.
Right.
Right. I'm just going to create a website, sell a product I don't even have, and let's see who purchases.
Totally.
Right. Let's see what type of interest we get, and then you build from there.
Sure.
And I'm kind of in the middle. I really love the the old school approach.
Yeah.
But all of the money I've made has been in the new school approach of just testing things out on Facebook ads. All of our leads come from Facebook ads.
Yep.
And I've been thinking through, okay, do you have to balance this, or do you just lean fully into the old school way of doing things,
Yep.
or you lean fully into the new school of doing things? And I wanted to get your thoughts on.
No, I think so. As you articulate that, the new school that you just described is infinitely more attractive, right? In the sense that, okay, hey, listen, I'm actually going to put an offer out that doesn't exist, so to speak, right? And then based on the opt-ins from said offer, right, I then go and build the product, right? So no, to that end, right, I think it's a balancing act, right? Obviously, there's a long history, right, of great marketers that have come before us. I mean, you've spoken to David Ogilvy, and to your point, right, you know, he came up at a very specific time, right, with very specific mediums and channels, right. So again, those guys are building ads for an analog world, a print world, a radio world, a TV world. Well, we're in a social media world now, right? We are in an AI world now, and so I think to the point you're making, our reach is unprecedented, right? We literally can get in front of millions of eyeballs. And so I think just through that sheer volume, right, you know, you'll effectively find a customer. Right? And so I think that's ultimately what you're speaking to. It's like, okay, we have tools that empower us to find customers first and build products second, right? And so to that end, right, I think that's the future, right? That's really where marketing is and where it's headed.
It's difficult to sell that.
Yeah.
You can't, because think about the audience of individuals who you would sell that to.
Sure.
Majority of them would be individuals with no money.
Yeah.
Right? Because they just have an idea. So you can't necessarily sell that, which is why I've been very torn, because I'm moving towards this new school way of marketing, but what we're selling is old school marketing.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So,
but then also to that point, it's also appreciating that, you know, what we're talking about isn't for everybody.
yes.
Right. And so I think it's also appreciating that, okay, well, who is going to appreciate the offer that you and I just described?
Yes.
Right. Well, that individual probably has access to capital.
Yes.
That individual probably understands, right, that, okay, if I take multiple shots at bat, right, I'm only going to connect with a few, right? And so that person has realistic expectations in terms of like what this takes, right? Now, again, if you take that same methodology you spoke to, and then you attempt to pitch that to an individual, right, that's married, right, to their business or married to their product, well, they may struggle with the fact that, okay, hey, you know what, the market for the product that you're married to is probably significantly smaller than you believe it is, right? And so irrespective of what I do for you, right, as an advertiser or a marketer, right, there's only so much that you and I can accomplish together, right? As opposed to what you just described, right, which I think is appealing to a growing segment of entrepreneur. I'm sure you've had contact with these guys, folks who are acquiring small businesses these days. I'm sure you're familiar with the SBA loan hustle, right? That's taken off, right? So I think those guys, or even just to what we spoke to earlier, people who are leaving Wall Street and are saying, hey, listen, I actually want to connect with really, really smart marketers. I have capital, right? Hey, let's just actually fund, right, discovery campaigns, right, and sort of see what customers we can acquire first, and then build out a bunch of solutions on the back end, right? So I think that's as you speak to new school marketing, there's also a new school entrepreneur, and there's a new school investor, right, that we could potentially appeal to as well, right? So again, it still comes back to the fundamentals, right, of like, okay, like who's my audience, right? Like who's my audience, right? What do they want, right? And then, you know, what are they willing to invest, right, to achieve what they want, right? And to the extent that there's a match there, right, then you know better than I do. I mean, there's an opportunity for us to collab.
So then, if let's say you're trying to put together a package for this new school way of marketing, do you not base it on the business, but you base it on how qualified the entrepreneur is? and you say, okay, you have capital. I see that you are a capable entrepreneur. Let's get together. Let's test a bunch of business ideas and let's see what comes of it.
Yeah. Well, again, I think you used the word. You use the word that's so important, right? I think in business, it's so important in marketing, and that's qualify. Qualify is a gentle way of saying discriminate, right? And the reality is that in business, we have to qualify and we have to discriminate. Why? Because we have limited resources and limited time, right? We can't work with everyone, right? And so to the point that you alluded to, I think there are businesses, right, that I may have had the capacity and flexibility to work with, 5 years or even 10 years ago that I don't necessarily have capacity to work with today, right? There are businesses that were qualified for an older business model that I operated in that are no longer qualified for a newer business model that I currently operate in. Another way of saying this is that I think over time in business, right, if we do it right, we get the luxury of choosing our customers over time. Right. I think in the beginning it's kind of like come one, come all, right? I'll work with anybody, with any budget at any time, right? And then I think you learn the hard way, right? That's not scalable, right? That's not sustainable, right? Going back to that endurance bit that I spoke to earlier. And so you now start thinking in terms of ideal clients, right? Perfect customers, clients that align well, right? With the model, that align well with the offer. Customers that are energizing, right? Fun to work with, inspire you ultimately, right? As a service provider, and then are also more inclined, right? To bring more people like them, right? Or refer more people like them.
I want to also get your thoughts on branding versus direct advertising. That's a huge debate now. So if you're looking to acquire customers, which route do you take?
Yeah.
Do you take direct advertising and go all in on, let's say, on Facebook ads? Or do you take the branding route and you focus on, okay, let's build a community. Let's build something for the future. Let's build something that's scalable. What would you do?
No, I'm laughing right now because to your point, it is a big debate right now. And I think part of the debate is that all of these terms are in flux right now, right? I think the through line of our conversation, and we're talking about quote unquote old school versus new school. And maybe that's the right way to frame it, right? But I think what's really happening right now is that we are experiencing unprecedented market dynamics, right? We have access to technology that has never existed before, right? So it takes all of our fundamental assumptions, right, about what's possible when it comes to reaching a customer, servicing a customer, delivering value to that customer. And once those fundamentals are disrupted, right, then our entire frame has to change, right, in terms of what we can do. I like the road that you're taking us on in this conversation, right? I mean, and I'm still thinking it through. So again, all of this is in my opinion, right? But if we're asking the question, what is selling, right? What is marketing? What is branding? What is positioning? Right? Positioning, of course, being my favorite, right? Because again, that brings us into the strategic heart of who are we looking to serve. But to get to your question on branding versus direct advertising, I'm going to pick branding, right? Ultimately, because what's not going to go out of style, right? I'm bullish on this. A lot of people would disagree with me. But as everybody loses their mind, right, over artificial intelligence, I think we're missing the point. And the point is, right, as a business owner, entrepreneur, we want to build a massive community of individuals who not only patronize our products and services, but go on to promote our products and services, right? And so to the extent that you have goodwill, right, to the extent that you have brand equity, to the extent that you have individuals who can go out into the world and evangelize others, right, on behalf of your offer, nothing beats that, right? And so I think every business owner, every entrepreneur is well served, right, to think in terms of brand equity, right? Think in terms of community building, and developing, living, breathing relationships, right, with our customers. So in other words, right, your customer isn't just a dollar, right, or isn't just one sale, right? But your customer is an individual, right, who you want to build a relationship with, right? Understand the inner dialogue, right, that's happening within said customer, and not just serve them products and services. But these days, right, brands are well served with serving those same individuals content, creative, right? Inviting them into a conversation, right, that they can perpetually stay connected to. So yeah, I'm bullish on brand forever. And again, if we want to get out from behind that word, right, because brand, all these terms are loaded, let's just talk about community, right? To me, it's really one and the same, right? If you have entrepreneurs that think in terms of building communities versus building brands, right, then it completely shifts our frame here.
Can you build a community if you take the direct advertising route? Can your product be so good that people just naturally want to talk about it?
So to that end, right, I like that question, right, and I think it brings us to a point. Direct advertising and branding are not opposed; they're complementary. And so, to the question that you asked, okay, can the product be so good, right, that it effectively sells itself? Or can the product be so good that people can't help but to tell others about it? The answer to that is yes. And going in deep, right, on product development is a brand building exercise in and of itself, right? Because it presumes, right, that you've taken a step back to think deeply, right, about the product and its appeal, right, to a specific individual, right? So you did that work on the front end, and so now direct advertising now is just an amplifier. Right? It's amplifying that branding foundation, right, that you've laid.
You were born in Nigeria.
I was born in DC, actually.
In DC. Oh, yeah. Wow. So your parents
that's right.
were born in Nigeria.
That's right.
Okay. So how do you feel about, like, as a Nigerian American born in the US?
Sure.
Do you feel sort of connected to Black Americans? Like, do you feel more African American? Do you feel American? Do you feel Nigerian? Like, how do you feel?
Whoa. Joe, that's a question, man. Yeah, I think it depends on the context. It depends on the room, right? So I think, as we have this conversation, right, a big part of what we're talking about here is really labels, like labels, terms, and the limits of those labels and terms. All of those terms you used, I can identify with any and all of them. So I'm African American, right? By virtue of being an African in America, right? I'm Black, right? I'm Nigerian. I'm Nigerian American, right? So, if I'm in my village, right, before my father, my grandfather, my uncles, and my aunts, they don't see me as American.
Really? They see you as Nigerian?
They don't even see me as Nigerian.
What do they see you as? Because I have this experience a lot
at the village level, right? They see me as Igbo, right, ethnically, but ultimately they see me as a member of this very specific village, right?
Really?
Absolutely, right? I am them, they are me, right? In that context, I'm going somewhere here, and that is that depending on the room that I'm in, that ultimately forms the conversation, right? So, again, I grew up, right, in the States. I'm a proud product of Montgomery County. The high school that I went to was a beautiful mix of, African American kids, first generation African kids, Caribbean kids, and we all mixed and flowed, and we all created a shared language together, right? And looking back on that, for all intents and purposes, we were Black, right? In that circle and in that sphere. Okay, then maybe you get to a place like Howard University, right? Okay, and the scope expanded, and you now meet Black folks from literally all over the world, different socioeconomic, different backgrounds, and then now together we're now able to have a nuanced conversation, right, about the diaspora, right? We're able to talk about the Caribbean, right, in a very sophisticated and nuanced way. We're able to talk about Africa, right, in a very nuanced and sophisticated way. We're able to talk about African American history, right, and African American people in a very sophisticated way. So I think ultimately what I'm getting at, right, is that Black folks are not a monolith, right? We're not one thing. And then even when you break out of Black folks, whether you're talking about white folks or really any folks, you know, we are all one, right? On one hand, but then on the other hand, there's real nuance and there's real distinction, right? And we're all products of different subcultures.
So where I'm getting at with this is, have you found it easy to work and collaborate in the entrepreneur space with other Nigerian business owners? Because what I've noticed, and our company works with a lot of different types of business owners,
Sure.
but if I work with an Asian business owner, I realize they have many different Asian business owners, other Asian business owners that they really collaborate with, right? For example, we have an Ethiopian client, and they are surrounded by an Ethiopian community as well.
Yeah.
We have some Indians, right? And they're surrounded by a bunch of Indian business owners that they work and collaborate with. But it's been difficult for me to see that in the West African community.
Interesting.
And I wonder if it's just my personal perception,
Yep.
or if other people also have the same perception and the same experiences.
So I think if we break down the term community, it's a compound word, right? We land at common and unity. My experience with African businesses, or businesses owned by African people, African American people, West Indian people, has overwhelmingly been positive. And even at an investment level, right? I mean, some of my early investors, current investors, also happen to be African. They also happen to be Nigerian, right? And so I think one of the narratives that I'm looking to push past, right, is this idea that we don't work well together, this idea that we don't support each other. I think the ways that we can get past that is recognizing some of the unique dynamics, right, when it comes to our history, and some of the unique dynamics when it comes to our present day economics. At the end of the day, it comes down to trust and value, right? So who I decide to do business with is a function of the value that they can provide me, the value that I can provide them, and the trust that we're able to create together, right? And so this almost comes back full circle to the brand conversation, right? And community building, right? One of the things that we're looking to do as an agency is live events, right? Free events, paid events, but the idea is to reclaim the event. Right? I think during the pandemic, we kind of locked into a very narrow notion of an event, right? It's virtual, webinar, online, Instagram Live, et cetera, et cetera. That's cool. There's a time and place for that. But I think bringing back the happy hour, bringing back the lunch and learn, bringing back just the kickback, just getting people together. It's how you build community, right? You know, one handshake at a time, one conversation at a time. And so I think if we do more of that, there'll be more opportunities to just organically, right? You know, talk through challenges, talk through opportunities, talk through a value exchange. So yeah, that's what I was saying. So to your point, you know, I don't know, maybe that's something that you and I could potentially collaborate on, some type of sort of like African business mixer of some sort, a function of some sort, and you know, you can do meet and greets, and okay, we can learn about one another's culture, and we can eat one another's food, and we can learn one another's stories, right? And in the process, fortify one another's businesses. I think there's smart, fun, and creative ways that we can do that.
Let me know what you think about this. I actually agree with you with the collaboration between Nigerians and business. I actually feel like that's one of the few groups of Africans that actually do that. And I just feel like everyone else is sort of clumped into African. But when someone is Nigerian, I mean, that's like the most popular country in West Africa, right? You guys are very proud of being Nigerian. And when someone is Nigerian, it's almost like you immediately know. And of course, there are popular tribes in Liberia. You mentioned Igbo. I think that's the most popular one.
Yeah, so Igbo is one of the big ethnic groups, one of the big three. So Igbo, Hausa, Yoruba, the big three, I think.
Yoruba is also very popular. Yes. But I had this perspective that I just explained earlier about noticing that a lot of Black entrepreneurs don't necessarily collaborate as much. And that broke down when I went to Switzerland for the first time.
Okay.
Because when I was in the United States, I essentially saw things as black and white. Right? White individual, Black individual. That's pretty much how I experienced race. I saw, okay, all the white individuals are working together, Black individuals are working together. But when I went to Switzerland, I experienced that, okay, this person is Swiss, this person is German. They don't actually even see each other as the same thing. Even though me as an American with my American perception of race,
Sure.
I saw them as the exact same thing. Like you guys are both white. You should be together.
Yeah.
Right? But they absolutely did not see each other as the same thing.
Yeah.
But here in the US, it's like, okay, if someone is Liberian, Ghanaian, maybe even Nigerian, they're all grouped as Black. And I never understood that after I came back from Switzerland, because it's essentially all different, drastically different groups.
Sure. The fact of the matter is, man-made division is a human decision. The fact of the matter is, these things don't matter. when you strip it back, they don't matter, right? And I think as you tell that story, there's a privilege, right, in being able to navigate these spaces. I don't know that many brothers that have been to Switzerland, right? And so to your point, as you tell that story, what you're ultimately saying is that, okay, in these different contexts, right, you find this persistent pattern, right? And that is that human beings have a finicky inclination, right, to finding difference amongst themselves, right, as opposed to looking for the common unity. And so when you and I are privileged, right, as advertisers, as marketers, right, we get to figure out creative ways to build common unity through products, through services, but ultimately through stories, right? And so, in the same way, in the Swiss context, white is not a monolith, right? Because again, in Europe, for the most part, white is the default.
Yes.
Right. And so there are different things I imagine that they may pay attention to, right, to distinguish themselves, right? Whether that's socioeconomic, whether that's the language they speak, whether that's the specific parts of Europe that they're from. Again, you're gonna find these different dividers, if you will. What we get to do again is build community. What we get to do is tell great stories. What we get to do ultimately, right, is to build bridges.
Let's say you're looking at a 17-year-old who wants to start a business. What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, no, if you're 17 and you're looking to start a business, right, I would say get a job. Yeah, counterintuitive, right? Get a job and learn some skills, right? Learn some skills. Learn to learn, right? Entrepreneurship and building a business ultimately is applied wisdom, right? It's really skills and refining those skills, and then hiring other people with skills and creating environments where they can refine their skills. And so now you're looking, and to the extent that you can actually build an organization, right, where we're upskilling together, right, in the service of a common vision, right, for a single customer, well, you're gonna build an amazing business, right? You're gonna build an amazing brand. But I think to to the 17-year-olds out there, I think many are tempted, I think, to kind of skip that step. But I think there's something to be said for some healthy self-discovery, pursuing some skill sets, identifying an entrepreneur or a business person who you admire, right? And working with them. And then through that process, right, finding your lane, and then launching a business, with community, with support, and with folks who can encourage you along the way.
To actually speak to something you just said, something I think a lot of people miss is mentorship. This could save you years.
Yeah, sure.
If you start a business and you try to do it all by yourself,
Yep.
you'll make so many mistakes, you'll lose so much money. So anyone who's watching this and they're thinking, I'm just going to skip the mentorship, or if someone is saying, hey, I can teach you how to grow your business and you just have to pay X, Y, and Z, pay the money, because you're going to save a lot of time.
That's right.
And not lose a lot of money.
That's right.
As well.
That's right. Absolutely. No, I could not agree with you further, right? I think everyone's been talking about coaching, right, for the past few years, but the fact of the matter is that it's invaluable. On one hand, coaches are either worth 10 times what they charge you, right? Or they're not worth anything at all.
Yes.
Right?
And it's difficult to find the ones that are worth.
Right. No, so to the point, your ability to discern, right, and identify, right, great coaches that are masters, right, where you're deficient, it's invaluable, because ultimately it's getting you to where you want to go faster, right, to your point on speed.
Obînna, thank you for your time.
Hey, man. Thank you.
Thank you for the conversation.
Appreciate it, dude. Yeah.